answer?
Yes, thank you. I hope we got started almost 10 minutes late after the break, so I'm looking at Jörg. I hope we can make some time for questions to the audience, from the audience to the panel. Lots of questions that we could ask, but let's turn to the audience first. François, please.
Yes, thank you, François Meyer. Thanks to all of you. And everything was very clear. Maybe I have a question for Anne. Thank you for being back with us. Thank you. A question about PICOs. First, without, of course, saying the names of products of specific joint clinical assessments, can you tell us whether there was some significant work done between all the participants to avoid that there are too high number of PICOs for the joint clinical assessments that have been or that are currently in process, or is the first one which is finished? And do you have an idea of the number of PICOs that are finally that have been finally included in the joint clinical assessments for, I mean, sort of a rough average number of PICOs for the products that are undergoing joint clinical assessments currently?
Thank you for raising these questions. Of course, I can confirm we've done a lot of efforts on the co-assessor side, but of course also in all the member states involved. Like Mark mentioned, every member state is involved in sharing their PICO requirements. So there's been massive work in understanding what those requirements actually meant and were referring to. Sometimes there was unclarity on terminology used. Same words might have been used, but for different meanings or the other way around. So I think that's one aspect to already try to consolidate where possible. So a lot there is done, but we do remain with the belief that for GCAs to be useful, they need to reflect all member states' needs. So if a member state does not agree to skip a part or an entire PICO, we then won't skip it, because they need to be able to use the report nationally. And I think this really comes back to the point Etienne made about the JCA report, and the PICOs need to reflect really what is the real clinical decision making. And I think that's what really we're trying to do with that. So I think in the majority of cases, we've managed to consolidate from a high amount of PICOs to more manageable amounts. I'm afraid I'm not able to give you a very exact number, because it depends on the type of product and the type of indication we have, how many PICOs we might end up with. I saw somewhere in a question it was suggested we might have 20 to 30 PICOs. I can reassure you we won't have that. We have a higher amount of PICOs, and I think from the exercises we've published a couple of years ago, I think you can expect. Yeah, I don't dare to give you a number, because if it's higher than what I say now, or if it's lower, you might want to hold me to it. Just but it definitely is not 20 to 30 PICOs.
Thank you, Anne. Other questions from the room? Montserrat, please. Microphone, please.
Sorry. One question to Etienne. You said that PICO should reflect the clinical practice. How to do that while the regulation and the guidance says that PICO should be policy-driven? And a small question to James. You didn't spoke about something that I have the impression is happening, that the requirement and the process seems to be very much assessor-driven. Do you have this experience?
I can start. I've been invited and from to explain the clinician perspective. So I try to make the point that evidences at the end should inform the clinician decision, and not only generate or feed the HTA process, and finally the access. That was my main point. My main point. The best of the best would be that HTA question and clinician question are the same, but sometimes it's difficult because of concomitant development, because of combinations, because of various phases of disease, first line, second line, third line, and there is a big work to align the clinician perspective and the HTA perspective. That's my point.
And maybe I need to declare we have Belgium and Austria as our own assessors. What I can say is, I mean, it's quite clear that and they're wonderful, as you're about to hear. From our own experience, it's quite clear that the assessors have been involved, at least partly with the confirmation check itself, and some of the questions that have come through, we would think, okay, that is an assessor perspective there. We've had also requests where we've had two sets of requests now from the assessors, not part of the confirmation thing. I split them into two areas. There's some questions that are really, really good. And what it's showing is that the assessors are reading all the documentation that is there. And they're picking bits out in the documentation, if that's in the protocol or wherever else for the clinical trial, and asking relevant questions for that. You know, and I look at that and think, actually, yes, they're really reading everything that is there. The other side of the questions that are being asked relate back to, well, the template says this, or the methods guidance says this. And so we're looking back at that. Sometimes we think, well, we think we've provided that. That's the interpretation challenge that we've got. But I'll give you an example. We've currently got one request, which is really to do with how the methods guidance and template, you need to provide this in addition to this, is a simple request. We think it's going to generate 250 pages of analyses that we don't think anybody will be able to make any use of itself. But the procedure is, you've got to provide that. So that's not necessarily the assessor's bit, they're just following through on that. But they're the bits that we need to just be careful and reflect back on. How useful is all that? And most of it is due to the safety side of things, because there is vast amount of safety data that really no HTA body has really ever gone into in that depth. So I think you need to do that. But I've been impressed, genuinely impressed by some of the questions that have been asked, and internally, so it's a really good question, that. Why have we not thought of that before? Which is more around seeking to understand than anything else. So well done.
This makes me thinking if one day the European HTA regulation will be changed, one day, if things will be changed, then a lot of other things have to be changed, implementing acts, guidance documents, etc. So I see already all the movement if something changes in the legislation in the first place.
Jörg, please.
One question from the folks online, and it goes to Anne. And it's a little, if you could elaborate on the selection of clinical and patient experts. When do you start bringing the patient and clinical experts in? When do they receive the letter of intent, and so on and so on? Just give us some insights here. Thanks.
Yes, I'll do my best, because this really is the Secretariat who does this work of identifying the patients and clinical experts. I'll now, for simplification, say experts. This is done really early on, and it happens in the form of bulk requests. So then it happens for both JSC and JCA at the same time, and for a couple of months in advance. because it is important to keep in mind at that stage, it is very confidential, the claims indications we've received and where JSCs might be taking place on. So we try to put that in the bulk request so that it's on a higher level. But it is for JCAs so early on that we, in most of the cases now, are able to select as a subgroup the individual experts at the time point. We also appoint the assessor and co-assessor. And that makes it possible to have already interactions with those experts at the time point the assessor and co-assessor start preparing their proposal for the PICOs. So yeah, I hope that clarifies the questions asked.
One more question.
Yes.
So first of all, I would like to congratulate Mrs. Willemsen for a very comprehensive lecture presentation. I have one question related to certain patterns that maybe you observed when evaluating different reports and submissions. And if yes, so are there any suggestions for improvement of certain methodologies or certain guidelines? Thank you.
I'm afraid that's not an easy question to answer in only a few minutes, but I'll try to start with that. Yes, we have observed variations between dossiers and also how, I suppose, whether it was a bigger or a smaller company. And we also realized, as James alluded, sometimes there is a matter of interpretation on the guidances. So what we have tried to do is work on Q&A documents because that's easier and quicker than producing or updating a guidance. For example, we realized that there was unclarity still on the individualized treatment concept in defining PICOs and how to then define that in the dossier. So there is a Q&A published on that one, which I highly recommend you all to read. But there are also a few other aspects. And I think what we really noticed is that sometimes there is a bit unclarity in what we expect from the systematic literature searches and what needs to be reported, especially in the absence of evidence. And I highlight that again because it also comes back to the first question on the amount of PICOs. Yes, we have a high amount of PICOs, but for some, we realize there's no data, unfortunately. And we accept that as well, but it really is about showing there is nothing and nothing could have been done. So I think that's a big learning. And the other is where I think we see that where the headquarters may not be based in Europe, we see there is different understanding of HTA and what is required. And I think that translates into more prioritization of the regulatory procedures over the HTA ones. So that's also the recommendation, again, to please focus on that and make sure there is sufficient resources available to do in parallel the EMA and the HTA work.
Thank you. In the end, the work that we are all doing together on implementation and improvement of EU HTA is meant to benefit patient access. So Len, I think it is fitting if we give you the last word. If you could pick one thing that you really want improved urgently in how in the legislation itself or how it is implemented, what would you choose?
I would choose a lot of things actually, but maybe if I have to prioritize, just for the moment, we need to ask a lot of questions to the HTA Secretariat on exactly how patients are involved and exactly how it's taking place. So I think a little bit more transparency on this, because for example, if we, like it was mentioned before, we receive this email from the Commission with this bulk request, then we take the time, and sometimes it takes a lot of time to find the patient expert, then we send the name to the Commission, and then we don't have any more information. So we would like also to be recognized about the work that we are doing and have a little bit more information, because if we don't follow up with our own patients, we don't know if they have been selected for example. And this is a little bit complicated for us after to do some trainings and to improve the training that we are doing if we don't have any informations. And then maybe something very important, because I really want to highlight this, but as patient organization, we are doing an amazing job, I think, but we need to be recognized for what we are doing. So funding.
Thank you very much. You want to
Well, just to conclude, to say a few words on this panel, I think that maybe the most important aspect that is summarizing the discussion is that in the future, in the changes of the regulation, in the adaptation and the improvements of the regulation, we need to be pragmatic. And as Anne said, let's go for a Q&A reply rather than changing the guidelines, because otherwise we'll never change anything. So this is something that, we appreciate this approach that the coordination group and subgroups and the European Commission are taking so far. I think this is something that is going in the right direction. Because we are pragmatic in the requests, but they are also pragmatic in listening to us and adapting the regulation. So thank you.
Thank you, Antonella. Thank you all for your attention, and we'll hand back over to Jörg.
So we can go.